Hi, everyone, and welcome to the panel discussion on risk management. I am Professor Justin Golston, and the objective of this panel discussion is to talk about risk management. We're going to define risk management through different lenses. We're going to talk about the primary contributors to risk in certain industries, and we're also going to touch on the topic of sustainability and those risks, because given that sustainability has been increasing in awareness over the last couple of years, we have some very interesting discussions on how you look at how people assess sustainability from a financial aspect. I'm very interested in that one. So we're going to introduce our panelists and have them give us our background. And Brenda, we're going to start with you. And also, once you introduce yourself, could you just give a brief definition of how you define risk management?
Okay, thank you, Justin. I'm very happy to be here today. And so let's say, currently I'm a consultant. I have my own LLC. I'm doing governance, risk, and controls consulting for companies in the electric utility industry. Prior to this, I was employed with various firms within the electric utilities industry for 37 years. I started my career in information technology. I transitioned that into an internal audit role. I took my skill set with IT to lead the risk group over IT and all the financial departments. And then I went from there to lead the governance, risk, and controls of the electric reliability group. That was oversight for reliable operation of the power grid for PPL electric utilities. So there was a risk component of my different roles over the last, say, 15 years. I see risk management as like merging business strategy with successful operations. It's having that independent view of what could go wrong and how you mitigate it, and knowing that up front. Every project anyone does, company, individual, there's risk. There's always risk. It's a question of what is the risk tolerance for the organization, and how do you understand it and mitigate it before you go forward, and not just having a, oh, well, whatever happens. You know, success is planning ahead.
Excellent.
I'll turn it over to, I forget who you said was going to go next, Justin.
Michael, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for that, Brenda.
Thank you. My name is Mike Gillespie. I graduated from Bloomsburg in 1995. I'm currently the Chief Accounting Officer of Hersha Hospitality Trust. We're a real estate investment trust that focuses on investing in hotel properties around the country. I've been here for 15 years, and we started as a very small startup. We're mostly an investment fund, so we're a small organization that owns hotels and manages the investment in them. My role here, I wear a few different hats. As Chief Accounting Officer, obviously I take care of the accounting and some of the finance function, but I was asked years ago to head up our risk management and our enterprise risk management process. So I'm the primary liaison with our board of trustees with regard to our risk committee and our audit committee. I also work with our different management companies that run our hotel and their risk management groups, and work with them closely on that. In terms of definitions, you know, I actually look at enterprise risk management as a process that's put in place, or really a process put in place by an enterprise to holistically look at all the risks that face the organization. And what do we do what is our strategy for each type of risk, and how do we maximize that risk to profit from it and produce results for our stakeholders? So I do look at risk as a key component of the business, and that you have to have risk in order to have profit, and how do you maximize that risk, both in mitigating loss and maximizing profits.
Excellent. Robert or Bob?
Yep. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad you could join us today. My name is Bob Lyon. I'm a 1985 grad of Bloomsburg. Went through the accounting program, CPA, worked for Ernst & Young before taking a career shift and went into leadership. So I've been in insurance since 1993. I joined a company in Harrisburg as CFO and was CFO for 1 year, before being appointed president of the organization. Was there for 20 some years and recently joined Rockingham Insurance, 6 years ago, located in Harrisonburg, Virginia. It's interesting being in an insurance company. All we do is manage risk. We measure risk, we quantify risk, and we price risk. And sometimes pass on the risk if we can. So it's truly extremely integral to everything that we do and how we look at things. And how we really look at things, we have our own enterprise risk management model, where we have a risk register of 40 or 50 things that can go wrong. And we look at that from a leadership team on a quarterly basis, on a formal ongoing process. We share that with the board of directors. And as we look at the risks that we face, we really try to put them into three buckets, and I'll illustrate by way of example. If you think about your own life, you're doing the same thing. You're looking at risk in everything you do. An example would be you need to get from point A to point B. You can take a car, which entails risk, and you may accept. You may try to mitigate that risk by putting on your seatbelt and driving at a reasonable speed. Or you may transfer that risk and say, I'm not willing to take the risk of driving the car and I'm going to take a train. So you're looking at those three buckets of risk every time you do something, and you're subconsciously making choices. Businesses are no different. They're looking at, do I want to accept the risk that I'm facing? Do I want to mitigate it by doing something or buying something or changing my processes? Or do I transfer it and do I have someone else take over that risk? So like it or not, what we're doing in our own lives and in our businesses are constantly evaluating risk and trying to mitigate or accept those that make sense to us. So
excellent. All right, thank you all for those introductions. And for the audience, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. And moving on to our initial question, you can say it was a question and introduction. All right, moving on to the next question. In your opinion, what do you think would be the primary contributor of risk? So this is for everyone. We're going to start with Brenda again. What do you think is the primary contributor of risk within your environment? And we talked in our preliminary discussion where we said that we have the people, we have the process, we have the technology, but now with the current situation, we're also introduced with external factors, where in project management, you always talk about those enterprise environmental factors. Right, but now we have those external factors with the current pandemic. So Brenda, in your opinion, it could be, it's not just one. It could be all of them. But in your perspective, where do you see are the contributors of risk?
Well, I do think they're all contributors, but if I had to pick one, I always go back to people. The human is the source of everything. And so whether you say I say that because a human is still designing the computer, the human is still writing the code, the human is doing that initial configuration or coding programming for machine learning. The machine learns once it's configured by the human. So I think when you if you think of it in a root cause assessment basis, you keep going back and you get to the human. And if you look at human performance training, if you look at their statistics, humans make, anywhere from 6 to 8 mistakes every hour. Some are big, some are small. And so that's those little mistakes without the proper controls can can create problems. So, we rely so much on technology today, but again, it's who's configuring the network perimeter, who's configuring,
Absolutely.
who's deciding when to apply security patches. The human, the human's writing those processes and deciding, well, from a resource perspective, we don't have to patch our devices every month, even though that's highly recommended. We're going to do it once a quarter or once a year. That creates risk for the organization. The big Experian hack that happened, they were 6 days late. They were at day 36 or 37 from applying a security patch that allowed that compromise of millions of people's personally identifiable information and credit card information, all of that. So days can turn into big problems. But that was a human decision. So I believe it always goes back to the human.
Excellent. Thank you. I have about two things we're going to go through here because I have about two questions that kind of spawn from that. So thank you. Michael?
Sure. So you're saying the source of risk,
yes.
or primary source of risk?
Primary source of risk, yes.
Yeah, I think Brenda did a great job of answering that humans are at the source of everything. We break our enterprise risk model. We focus on risks that are environment that come to us from an outside threat. We go to risks that are process oriented. So whether they're financial, operational, governance, leadership, those kind of risks that would be created from the process that you engage in your business. Or we also think of information for decision making. And I don't know, and in those terms, do we have the right information to run our business? Are we, if you're just unaware of what is going on in the environment, it's really hard to react to an environmental risk. If I don't know a hurricane's coming, It's hard for me to buy hurricane insurance in advance or prepare my hotels.
Or have transformers in Brenda's case.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't know that I can really pick one source of risk, but I'll focus on the information for decision making. And I think being well informed is probably the first stage of mitigating any risk. And so having information flow through your organization about the risks that exist, and having the right information about your environment, what your customers want, what's going on in the political realm, what's going on in the financial realm. If I look at running a real estate investment trust, we have to borrow to buy our hotels, and interest rate risk is a very big risk for us. And we need to keep up to date on what's going on with interest rate. And if we're caught flat-footed because we don't know what's going on in the market, then we lose. So I'll focus on information, having the right information to make good decisions to mitigate your risk.
All right. Okay. Thank you for that. Bob?
Yeah, thank you. We're sort of agnostic to where the risk is coming from, whether it's people, processes, or technology. And we sort of look at it and say, well, risk threats are risk threats. And we need to, again, accept, mitigate, or transfer what they are. I can just share from my own personal experience that when we look at our risk register, number one is a cyber risk. And we look at that and say the likelihood of that happening is high, and the impact is significant. So that puts us at a score that's our highest risk. And as a side note, we did have a cyber attack on October 2nd, and we were impacted, and we have come out the other side of it. So I guess as we look at how the process works for ERM, it was our highest risk. We were not wrong. We were attacked, and we had enough mitigating factors in that we were able to recover from it. That's much different than our number two risk, which is some type of weather-related event. So if you think about those two, one being a man-made, i.e. cyber attack, and the other one being quote unquote an act of God, being with weather, how we approach those two factors are much different. In both cases, we were able to transfer the risk by buying additional protection. But those are just two out of a wide number of risk. Risk registers and threats are not static by any stretch of the imagination. Right. We need to constantly continue to monitor. And one of the ones that we're contemplating right now is what we'll call geopolitical risk. Mm-hmm. We wonder if there is a very real threat to the breakdown of what we assume to be basic governmental functions that we ordinarily take for granted. For instance, we have noticed the mail. My sister mailed me a birthday card from Westchester outside of Philadelphia to Harrisburg. Took over a week to get here. Well, the business implications of that is if we're sending out invoices to customers, our cash flow, using that as a primary source of communication, we're seeing that, sort of that just a normal mail flow being interrupted or slowed down. We see disruptions in police response in certain areas, perhaps in fire response, and they have very real business implications to us because we price our product and we anticipate risk based on one model, and if that model is changing, we've got greater risk to look at. So always evolving, always balancing, and always evaluating what's going on in the marketplace.
It's interesting, Bob, what both you and Brenda said. You're mentioning some of these risks, and I pull together a top 10 list for our board, and I usually give them every quarter. I meet with them and I give them directional indicators. Has this risk increased, and has this risk decreased, or does it drop off of our top 10? The top 10 really.
What's the top 10 list? I want to hear the top 10 list.
It's not as good as a Letterman top 10 list for those that remember Letterman. But for us, we do have cyber on it, and I do have catastrophic events, which would be that weather type of event for our hotels. But our number one was kind of a tie for industry and sovereign political. So we're talking about investor creating value for our investors and our stakeholders. Us being in the hotel industry in the middle of a pandemic, it's tough to draw investors, and we saw our share price go down solely because our cash flows were going down as well. But there's also just being in the hotel industry during the pandemic, and I tie sovereign political in with that because some of the actions of our government and other governments have reduced desire for travel or demand for travel in this country, whether it's pandemic, but we had this prior to the pandemic where travel bans and having it government actions that make travel to the United States more appealing or not appealing and do have a significant impact on our business and whether we are able to create value for our stakeholders. Number two for us, capital availability. So we're a real estate investment trust. We need capital to build our hotels, to maintain our hotels, to buy our hotels. And so if capital isn't available, as a real estate investment trust, we actually have to distribute all of our earnings. So if we want to grow our business, we need capital. And prior to the pandemic, capital was readily available, whether it's in the form of equity or debt. Now with the pandemic, we're all scrambling to find capital to keep our businesses afloat and weather this storm. So I can go through some of the others are human resource. We're a very human resource dependent business. And so access to human resources at a cost that makes sense. And so, and that risk itself changes over time. At first it was, I'd say a year or 2 years ago, it was wage pressure and organized labor and how we work with organized labor to make the best fit for our hotel. And we were more worried about, could we find qualified people at a cost that wouldn't crush our profits? Now it's more a matter of the health, safety of our human resources, and can we find people to come in and work in the environment that we have right now? So these risks, while they're in the top 10, the nature of the risk changes, and I give, the different briefs to our board so we can monitor and react to those.
Yeah, they certainly ebb and flow. For instance, we had identified pandemic risk as a potential risk long before this ever happened. Probably going back to swine flu 5 or 6 years ago, and it's in our risk register, but we didn't spend much time on it. We thought it was low likelihood and probably low severity. Well, that changed in February and March, as we all know. We can look at what the impact was. So even if you identify a risk and think you prepared for it, yeah, we had a process and procedure in place for what pandemic risk looked like that didn't anticipate anything like what we just saw and being shut down on what's now going on close to 12 months. So you got to be adaptable, and you got to be able to say, okay, here's what we thought was going to happen, and here's what has actually happened. I can tell you with maybe some degree of shame, I never anticipated a pandemic that would take us out of the office for 12 months. I thought our healthcare system or the pharmaceutical industry, I just never pictured a worldwide pandemic affecting us the way that it has.
And that kind of plays into the sovereign political risks that you have. Will your government act in a way that preserves, your business environment, or I'm in the same boat, Bob, but we didn't see. I always joked with my risk committee that, we have a risk for everything identified, this glossary of risks that we look at. The one I don't have is zombie apocalypse. I would have put
that's not on the list?
It's not on my list, but I would have put pandemic right there as just as likely as zombie apocalypse, is that we have a pandemic where our revenues for the second quarter are going to shrink from 147 million to 17 million, and that we wouldn't be able to operate our business or pay our bills. So it's funny. I did a presentation to our risk committee. It was as late as March 5th. And we were still modeling the impact of SARS, which occurred and never really made its way to our shores. And I was modeling MERS, which was Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. And we were looking at some other, pandemic. And we had always looked at it from the lens of, there'll be less foreign travel into our country, which will, lower our results. It'll take some pressure off of our demand, which will lower our results. And then 3 weeks later, we're almost out of business. We're closing more than half our hotels. So that one caught us by surprise, and we're trying to learn from that. But the slide that I pulled together, which I'm looking at right now, we went through and said, okay, well, there's an environment risk here. It's our industry, sovereign, political, catastrophic loss. We looked at process risks and health and safety, both our guests and our employees, and business interruption. And then information for decision making. We said, this virus is going to make it difficult for us to have information for budgeting and planning. And we still don't have that. We cannot tell you ordinary year pretty reliably. We could tell you what our year was going to look like. We can't tell you what next month's going to look like.
Right.
And so these are some risks that we're facing and that we identified, and now we're just figuring out how to best deal with them.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to tie in, Michael. When you first started, you talked about information, and I think it does all get back to that. Information is key to assessing risk, and you can't really mitigate something if you don't understand it. Mm-hmm. I think to successfully assess risk, you at times you have to be a bit of a negative Nelly, if you will. You have to be that person that challenges what nobody really wants to hear. I don't think anybody wanted to think that we were going to be, locked down for weeks on end and things shut down for months on end. Can
you bring up the Boeing example you talked about yesterday? That one was that kind of like falls straight into this one.
Yeah. So I don't know if people are familiar with the issue that Boeing is having with the development of their MAX 737, and there were a couple crashes. Well, when the root cause investigation was done within Boeing and with external entities, people were aware of what was going on, but nobody spoke up. They didn't. Whether they justified it individually or within smaller groups, or just didn't understand the impact and connecting the dots. But people knew that decisions were made. Well, we're going to remove this sensor, but yet the engineers had put 3 sensors because they knew that that's what gave you the highest quality of a reading, and it wouldn't, you wouldn't have plane failure. People did not take all of that information and really think about the impact. And I think with risk, as I said, there's always going to be risk, but the question, you got to get down to whether, is this a risk of, well, we're going to run out of ice cream, so people have to have cake for dessert? That's like, who cares, right? I mean, that's minor. Or is this a case of, this is a risk that is going to kill the business. This is going to destroy the business, and it cannot be sustained. And somewhere on that continuum, it's like, you got to understand, where are you going to put that risk dot? Is it a nice to have, or is it it's going to kill our business? And some of, it could be, it's going to kill the business, but we know about it in long enough lead time in order to take action. So a big disruptor in the electric utility space is what's called distributed generation. An example is solar. So if everybody's putting solar panels on their buildings, or, wind farms are going up that don't have nearly the regulations. Wind farms don't, not to get too engineering here, but they don't provide what's called voltage control. So in a time of flux within the power grid, wind farms don't help. And so this has all been coming over the last 5 to 10 years, but it's time to plan. How does the local utility deal with this disruptor to the industry? Is it going to make the electric utility go the way of Betamax, or the local video store, or are they going to step up and change the business model to be there as critical infrastructure? We talked a little bit about electric cars. You still need to plug them in somewhere. So I think that it gets to information is just, it's key to plan, to mitigate, to understand. Yeah, I think it's just a point you can't gloss over.
And Brenda, in your example, Boeing, Volkswagen, they were all victims of, you could look at it from communication. You could also look at it as culture. And I'm looking at my risk model. I always try and think like where, our risk model is really just a glossary of terms. We define our risks. We then put our mitigation strategy and responsibility. And I look at this and I say, we have a whole section in process risk about empowerment. And that's talking, and so part of that empowerment is creating the culture within your company so that people can communicate without fear and do the right thing that will create long-term value versus short-term gain. So there's under empowerment, we have risks, we have things like leadership, authority, communications, and how do you incent behaviors to make sure that you're doing things for the long-term good. And I think both at Boeing and at Volkswagen, which had their problem with pollution controls, in both cases, people knew and they didn't feel empowered to bring it up, or at least were squelched at some point, and they didn't have that culture. So risk, we always look at risk, and it's any kind of risk process or control process starts with tone at the top. Do I have the right environment where if I plant these seeds, good things will grow? And or do I have fallow soil where if I plant, no matter what I plant, it's not going to produce good results?
Yeah, at one point I was chairman of a 500-bed hospital, and one of the things they put in was empowerment, because when they went back and did root cause analysis on unfavorable outcomes, oftentimes the bad example is you went in for an amputation and they took off your wrong leg or wrong foot, and they'll go back and do the root cause. Yeah, well, it obviously it does. But they'll do the root cause analysis, and they'll go back, and the nurse or orderly will be like, well, of course I knew. But in the operating room, the surgeon was considered the person in charge. Someone did not feel empowered to raise their hand and say, you really you got to take off the left foot rather than the right foot. And, it got so bad, they got to the point where hospitals just wrote on the leg, don't cut this one, So giving the people the empowerment to be able to raise their hand and say, doctor, you're making a mistake. So they put in process something called, I forget what it was, shout out, raise your hand type of thing, that anyone in any setting could raise their hand and say, we're about to make a mistake, and do it without blowback.
Mm-hmm.
Is critical, because there are some people that take exception to that, and that's when mistakes happen, because none of us are fallible.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So everyone, there's a number of you on the, attending this session. So if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. But since you all don't have questions, I have a question. So, so we talked about the importance of information, and there are some of my students that's in this session. And my students know that I am crazy about machine learning and artificial intelligence. So I'm very interested in all of you in that. Do you all use AI or ML to assess risk? Because the reason why I'm asking this question, let me frame the reasoning. So I did a panel discussion on drones yesterday, which was amazing. And so one of the panelists works for the insurance industry as well. And first off, I was like, okay, what does he know about drones? But drones are making a big impact on the insurance industry. So as opposed to you walking on the roof of a Lowe's or a Home Depot, I just fly a drone over it, to measure the insurability, So, but he says that in the other realm of insurance, if someone gets in an accident, he'll have the person who got in an accident take 4 or 6 pictures, send it into them. They run it through the artificial intelligence algorithm, and they'll know, the amount of damage within seconds. And now instead of you waiting for a week and a half to get a check, you can get a check, by the next day, because they're able to use AI to filter through all of those hundreds of pictures for that same exact model, same exact car, where it's hitting the same exact place, and make that determination using artificial intelligence. So are you all using AI for things like that and decision making? Then I have another question after that, because there's some risk and bias associated with AI and ML. Michael?
We're a very small organization, so I'd say in risk assessment itself, specifically risk assessment, mitigation, our risk management process, we're not using AI. I would say in running our business, we do, and I think that presents risks in its own. And so, like in terms of us selling hotel rooms, if you think through the business of a hotel, it's supply and demand,
right?
And any room you don't sell on a given night, that inventory evaporates. It's not like you can sell it the next day; it's gone. And so we try and maximize rates. And so the best thing you can do is be the last room sold in a given city and a given night. You'll get the best rate. And so there's a lot of strategy around revenue management, much like airlines yield a plane. As you get closer to the date and the plane gets more full, they start raising the prices. And then if they see that it's not going to be filled, they start lowering the price. We have that. And we do embody AI to help us make those, for the most part, within parameters, those are algorithms that are making those pricing changes across our portfolio. And then when we see deviations from that, we have some human intervention. But there's some risk to that. There's some risk to you not creating the value for your stakeholders and your shareholders because the AI goes off the rails or isn't working the way you want it to. So we don't use it in our risk management per se, but we use it in our business, which creates some sort of risk of process risk.
Right. Interesting. Very interesting. So I've seen that with my clients with Amazon's tools, because oh, that's a different discussion. Bob.
Yeah, based on your description, I now know Tom was on your panel yesterday. So.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. Tom, inside joke, but Tom is a senior executive with CNA Insurance, so know that he's using AI. We use AI as a predictor, along with machine learning. So what I said earlier was insurance is all about trying to get the right price for risk. So we're constantly trying to look at many different data points for different insureds, and trying to figure out what's the right price for risk. Because if you think about insurance, if you don't file a claim, you've overpaid for your premium by multiples. If you file a claim, you've underpaid by multiples. So we're looking at laws of large numbers and trying to divine from that, what's that right mix of price and customer accounts. A good example would be, the AI may look at magazine subscriptions for someone, which doesn't sound very intuitive, but the industry finds that people that subscribe to Better Homes and Gardens tend to take more pride in their property than maybe someone that's subscribing to Monster Truck Monthly. So that goes to lifestyle. Or one that's always in the news is the insurance industry uses credit scores. And then people say, well, why would credit scores correspond to my driving record? And there's a very clear statistical tie-in between people with relatively good credit scores and lower claims results, whether it's because people with good credit results can put the money into maintaining their cars, whether they're less likely to inflate claims because they have economic pressure in other parts of their life. There's probably 100 or 1,000 different ways that factors in, but there's very clear linkage. So the insurance industry on the client acquisition side is using AI and machine learning, and then as Justin alluded to, we're using it on the claim side. So taking a couple of pictures of your auto after an accident, the industry can determine with a pretty high degree of precision how much that will cost. And therefore, it's good for the customer because they can then go proceed to the repair shop and get things worked on pretty quickly. It's better for the industry because we don't have to send humans out. So, if you take that one step further, there's an entire segment of the industry in financial technology and insurance technology that's using these tools to be able to introduce new products. Think of the scooter that, if you walk out down from Carver, you maybe see a scooter or a pile of scooters that you can go and jump on and ride around for half an hour and drop off. Right. Well, there's insurance embedded in that price that you have. And there's a company that's actually insuring that 30-minute time period when you are riding that scooter. Imagine the implications of trying to do that, because they're not issuing a policy. They're not, but they're measuring it. And it's insured. So there's a lot of stuff going on out there. And if you're interested in technology and the intersection of technology and artificial intelligence, it's a wide open space for you.
Yes, it's unlimited. I mean, it's very unlimited. Brenda, do you have any examples?
I do. I'll tie back to your drone conversation. So in the electric utility space, they've been using drones for quite some time to fly lines. And it's a way of just looking for potential issues. Mm-hmm. Occasionally, like I'll say a bolt will back out. That could cause a tower problem, but they'll also look for sagging lines or deterioration, things like that. So that's planned, but they'll also look if there is an outage. If they, based on weather, if they can't fly a helicopter, maybe they can get a drone in to see where the problem is and how bad the damage is, mm-hmm. to speed up restoration. So that's been going on. They've expanded that into AI with vegetation. So it's very important to maintain vegetation along transmission lines.
Right.
The blackout that occurred in the Northeast that went all the way up into Canada in 2003, that was caused initially by a tree hitting a line and then an operator not taking proper action. So, vegetation management is key. And so they're using AI to look at the types of vegetation in different areas around different voltage lines and tracking what's called the right of way. So the space around the lines, growth of the plants, different plants grow at different rates. What's the weather been like? Lots of rain, not a lot of rain, that affects the growth pattern. And so they're doing all of that analysis to see, do you have to send tree maintenance crews out? Could you use, herbicides and planning? So, lot happening in that space. Another where AI is tracking, it's doing behavioral analysis, is think about security monitoring. Every network has, more than likely has some amount of monitoring on it. What are people doing while they're on the network? Larger companies are looking at, well, if Brenda normally is logged in at 8 a.m. and she works till 8 p.m., if Brenda now is connecting to some database at 2 a.m., why? Maybe it's not Brenda. Maybe somebody has Brenda's account. And
right.
There all sorts of analysis is being done through AI. It's learning, the machine is learning, how does Brenda function on the network?
Right.
So Brenda does that anomalous thing, then at some point a human gets involved to check it out. But that's a growing field in the security analysis.
Interesting. Thank you for that. So we have 2 questions to come in. Thank you for your questions. Please keep them coming. So Sarah asked, can each of you explain the one thing that has contributed most to your success so far in your career? That's a great question. Brenda, start with you.
I guess
you get no breaks.
That's okay. Wow. I think, you heard me say, I went from IT to auditing to into the transmission organization. It's just being open to new opportunities and, kind of what I call lifelong learning. I went from mathematics and IT background, and I just wanted to learn more. And I'd say have a plan with that, not, don't be so, don't just jump around. My plan was, I was in IT. I knew one aspect in a service organization of the business. I wanted to learn more about the business. I went to auditing, and I got a very broad picture of the company and in areas that I did not know anything about. I'm not an accountant, and I had a team of accountants reporting to me, and I got involved in, auditing the finances of the company. That was not my strength. Hence, went and got I got an MBA to help me with that business aspect. There's just look for the opportunities in each position you have. And I think my other thing is, and I think it really plays into the state we're in right now with the pandemic, it's like, have a little grit. Don't give up. Not every situation is going to be perfect. I mean, I loved my career. I had many, many, many more good days than bad. But you've got to have some grit to get through, be it a tough boss or a tough project, or a situation where you have imbalance at home but balance at work, that type of thing. And so, have some grit and be kind to yourself while you get through it.
Yes, thank you for that. Amazing. Michael?
Yeah, those are all great points, and I'll probably just have variations of what Brenda said. But I've made an entire career as an accountant. I've made an entire career of doing things that no one else wants to do. There's, very few kids who wake up, when they're in grade school and say, "Wow, I have a passion for accountancy. I really want to get out there and do that."
There's no one.
But I've made a very nice living and made a very nice career in doing those things that other people don't want to do, and I just happen to like them and feel good about them. So when it came to risk management, I started my career with Arthur Andersen, which was one of the big four, now big four accounting firms. And I took to risk management training. We were doing risk assessments for our clients, and I kind of dove deep in that and went to our national office and did some training in that. So I became well versed in just the language of risk management and the models used to kind of oversee it. And so when the opportunity came up at Hersha and we had an audit committee chair, said, we really need to put more structure around our risk management. We're a very flat company. And so there's only really 1 or 2 levels between our CEO and our entry level employees. So we communicate very well together, and we didn't need the formality of structure. but our audit committee said, we really should be putting some just actual planning around this. And so they came to me and I said, sure, I'll do that. I have some skill in it and no one else wants to do it, so I'll do it. So I maybe a better way to say it is try and make yourself indispensable. I make myself indispensable by doing things that maybe other people don't jump at the chance to do, but make yourself indispensable so that no one can ever think about like, oh, we can't run this company without that person because they do all these things for us. So I've tried to make myself indispensable.
Excellent. That's excellent. Bob?
Yeah, I'm going to play off what Brenda and Mike had said. Early on in my career, and maybe throughout my career, you got to be willing to do what others are unwilling to do.
Mm-hmm.
That Ernst & Young, that meant at times hitting the office at 4 a.m. We used to have a joke at the office that if you don't come in Sunday, don't bother coming in Monday. And that was okay. I wouldn't want to do that now, but early in my career, that was okay. Working beaucoup hours, many hours is just what I needed to do. So be willing to do what others are unwilling to do, and I think Mike kind of touched on that. The other thing is be intentional.
Yes.
Have a plan, and just don't wander. I see so many people just kind of wander from one thing to another without any larger picture of what it is they were hoping to accomplish. So be intentional about what you're doing. And I know the question was, what was one thing? I find that to be a little limiting, so I'm offering you 3.
Keep going.
Okay, the last one is know yourself. Whether it's a Myers-Briggs survey or any number of personality surveys, understand what makes you tick. For instance, I'm more of an introvert, which means I get my energy and I recharge my batteries more from being alone. An extrovert will recharge their batteries from being in larger groups. So for me, it's fly fishing and golf, which are more solitary. For others, it's maybe going to a music concert that recharges their batteries. The reason that's important is if you don't understand what makes you tick, when you fall into your patterns, others will see it, but you won't. One of my examples is I was a CPA. I just love curling up with a good spreadsheet, and anymore being a CEO, that's not my job. That's not my role, and that's not a good value to the organization. So the other day I was doing some analysis, and I asked one of my senior people for some numbers, and told her what I was doing, and she said, you need to go do more CEO type stuff right now. I'll take care of this, which is just a reminder of, I would have actually enjoyed doing the spreadsheet and still crunching those numbers, but that's not the best value that I could bring to the organization with my time. And you need to be very jealous of your time, and you need to allocate your time to the greatest output, and not just what feels good at the moment.
Excellent.
Yeah. Hey, Justin, I have to comment on Robert's statement. I remember an interview I had near the end of my career with a VP, and after I got the job, she calls me in and she says, "Okay, you got the job," and I said, "Okay," and I'm expecting we were going to talk about some things. She goes, "No, I know you got it. Just tell me one thing. How do you recharge?" And I looked at her and she goes, "By yourself or with lots of people?" That was all that's what she wanted to know. She says, "I know you got the technical. I just need to know that." And so when you said that, I just immediately flashed back, and I think it is key. No, and not just personally, but almost let others know as well. I think it is important, be it coworkers, up or down the chain, for them to know a little bit about you and how you operate, so that when you're operating in stress, things aren't perceived more in a bad light. Everybody's got to you got to kind of be able to relate to the people. I think it's
right.
Don't be afraid to share or be a little vulnerable with
yes others. Absolutely. So yeah, I think that I'm right there with Bob, where I just want to be on the water. I want to be on the water to recharge. I'm more of a saltwater fisherman, but I'll be in Ocean City, Maryland, or in Outer Banks, and I'll be 14 hours into it. I talk to my wife and I say, I just need 30 minutes. I go out there for 30 minutes, hit that sea water hit my face, and I'm good. I'll go right back to the house and get right back at it. So that recharge is very, very, very important. And I think that, to what everyone is saying, don't be afraid to take risks. And I would say that, people ask me, what's your main, people's asking me, what's your main, suggestion or recommendation for undergraduates? And I always say, challenge the status quo, think unconventionally. That's my 2 cents. That's led to my success, and I always tell people that, if you work for an organization that do not allow you to take risks, do not allow you to fail, maybe that's not the place for you, because that's taken away from innovation, right? That's taken away from your creativity, in my opinion. That's just my opinion, So, but I think that's vital. So I think that's vital early on in your career. So. Well, I don't think that Mike would like you taking risk in a risk management firm, but I'm a supply chain guy, so I'm speaking from my experience. All right, so so to that point, there was one excellent question that came in from Miranda, and she said that she reviewed the case that was about balancing AI and human interpretation in supply chain sustainability ratings. The issue the company was facing was that AI worked quicker and produce consistent results, but often lack the contextual insights that humans have. How have you balanced the presence of AI and human interpretation in risk management, and what are the pros and cons? That's an amazing question. Who wants it first?
Well,
I'll just say, go ahead, Brenda.
No, please go. No, go.
Oh, I would just say, I think within that question probably is part of the answer, in that with AI, you are gaining speed and efficiency, and you're doing things faster than a human can do. But I think you lose context in some occasions. And as AI gets better and better, it gets smarter and smarter. But there is still a human context that it's hard to observe the entire world and all the inputs that go into decision. AI can only observe what you tell it to observe. And so earlier I gave the example of our revenue management systems, and there have been times where, had we blindly followed our AI and the algorithms we have for revenue management, we would have had an empty hotel, because there wasn't perfect information about what our competitors were doing going into the AI. And so they don't know that the guy down the street in the last minute discounted the hotel and undercut us, and people canceled and rebooked. And so those kind of contexts, I think you just need to, with AI, put in parameters where human intervention is necessary. Not my business, but something we work with is our stock markets. And you have the New York Stock Exchange and you have the NASDAQ. And the NASDAQ is for the most part electronic trading. And you see certain days, it doesn't happen every year, but at certain days over a few years, you'll get these massive sell-offs, because there's a lot of electronic trading going on based on algorithms, and the algorithms get it wrong. But there's sale orders go in as soon as all these different factors play in, and then you see the market bounce back, and there's a lot of volatility in that. What New York Stock Exchange will say is they have certain circuit breakers in that when you hit these metrics, they shut down the market for 5 minutes to cool off, give space, allow context and human intervention. And if the algorithms are right, they're right. And if they're not, but they that very, very fast pace of AI, that efficiency, which makes it so great, also can be what creates volatility or creates a system where it goes out of control.
Right. Excellent.
I think we saw that the market shut down earlier, like I think in April, maybe late March, with the pandemic. I think that was the first time there were a couple blips where it took that pause.
Yeah, and I'll say AI works great. Like a lot of processes, they work really great in ordinary times. And as soon as you put an unexpected stress on it, And I imagine supply chain, I'm not in that field, but I imagine it's how do I account for that unusual stress point that's going to break the process that's meant to work 95% of the time? But what do I do about the 5% of the time? And that's probably human intervention.
I said there's no pandemic AI algorithms right now. We created them, but in February and March, no. So
yeah, I'd add on to what Michael said that I think if we think back, 20 years ago, before even just plain, we went from paper and manual processes to automation. It was the same question, right? You code, you develop an app to do something. Well, if you develop it incorrectly, all you're going to do is get incorrect results a whole lot faster, because it's going to do the wrong thing continuously. And so I think with AI, you need that monitoring. And I always think of monitoring as part of risk management. You can't, because things are always changing, being an internal or external factor. So your firms aren't, well, maybe Robert, for a public firm, the Sarbanes-Oxley rules that came in after some of the financial chaos that we had earlier in 2000, they required what were called general computer controls. So you had to do testing, that typically an internal audit group or an external auditing firm, they would do testing of those systems to make sure that they were functioning properly. And, you don't know what you don't know, but that's, to me, you need that monitoring, whether it's a system processing, access requests, or, account ledger information, or, some newfangled thing with AI. You got to have some sort of monitoring on it. It's that, to give it the human context, to make sure that things are still correct.
Yeah. Right. Great. Yeah. Thank you for that question, Miranda. It's really at the nub of I think of what we're trying to do with AI and machine learning. I have two examples I'll use and see if I can help shed some light on it. The first is, I mentioned earlier that we use credit scoring as one of the indicators of profitability. One of the we will see a situation where maybe someone has no debt, therefore no credit score. So our model would kick out and say, ooh, bad risk, when actually it's just diametrically opposed to that. It's a good risk. You've got someone that has no debt, has no financial leverage, and therefore is probably a better risk than someone that's not. So the machine is unable to discern that, but a human can. A human can look at this and say, okay, need to intervene. My favorite story is, because in the insurance space, automated driver assisted cars are becoming more and more of an issue. I got into the auto space around 2014 and spent an awful lot of time looking at what automated cars would do to the insurance industry, because if cars stop running into each other, the size of the insurance industry is going to go down, because no one's going to need insurance. Because drivers will be taken out of the equation, cars will talk to each other, and they won't collide. So doing a lot of research back in 2014, by 2020, they said cars would be automated. There would be no auto insurance industry. You can see where we are today. That's not the case. Cars are getting smarter, they're getting safer, but it's still very much controlled by humans. One of the things that the industry has looked at is, every time there's an automated car that has an accident, they look at the root cause analysis. And one of the things they found out was the number of rear end collisions was actually going up with an automated car. And that seemed to be odd. Here, what happens is, if you have an automated car that's coming up to an intersection and the light turns yellow, the automated car will brake, and it might brake hard. For a human, i.e. the car behind it, sees yellow, and to humans, that means I better floor this sucker because I need to get through it before it turns red. Therefore, the conflict between the computer and the lead car braking, the human responding as a human does, generally speaking. Maybe I'm just showing my driving skills. They accelerate, and you've got that rear end collision. So how do you program that automated car, so that when it sees yellow, it makes a decision? The other variation of that is, you have two humans walking in front of the car, one to the left, which is a grandmother, one to the right, which is a mother pushing a baby. Where does the car go? How do you make that judgment?
Right. Somebody has to go. Yep.
These are all
that's the ethical trolley example. That's an old ethical issue.
Yeah, exactly. But computer doesn't deal in ethics. It deals in ones and zeros. Even with machine learning, it still comes down. It's binary. It's 1 or 0. Whereas humans have the capability to make decisions. Not always the right decision.
That leads to a different point on AI. Actually, it's a very similar point. The risks of AI. One of the great things about AI and computers is that they're supposed to be without bias. You can make data-driven decisions that should be unbiased by, not predisposed by experience or anything else that may lead you to a bad decision. But there's still people programming AI, and those biases have been found time and time again to be embedded in AI. That may lead you down to where you think you're making a data-driven decision, but to Brenda's point earlier, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have a well-formed AI algorithm, then those biases may not be eliminated, or may be exaggerated actually, and may lead you down to make some bad decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, and it goes back to what you said. Humans are developing these algorithms, right? And that's so these algorithms biases have been uncovered within the financial department and the lending, areas and things like that. And it's getting a lot of publicity. It's getting a lot of awareness. It's not really giving AI a bad rap. It's just raising the awareness so that we can be on the lookout of it. As we continue to develop these AI algorithms. So excellent discussion. I can talk about AI all day, so I'm gonna leave that one alone. Anything else to add on that point to Miranda's question?
Just tying into AI, if you have the opportunity, there's a documentary on HBO. I think it was put out by Vice News. It's called The Future of Work, and it's thought provoking as to what types of jobs and how AI will affect the workforce, and it also talks about the socioeconomic impacts, that we should probably be planning for now.
So in that we're supposed to end at 12:15. We had one to go a few minutes over yesterday. The minute you guys shut off, but we're going to try to wrap up by 12:15. Okay. And I think that we're good in that we did talk about. Do you think that we want to talk about the career opportunities? Because we did talk about the key, drivers to your success in the careers. But I do want to talk about the sustainability aspect. I also want to talk about reputational risk. As it pertains to risk, and because I think that there's and this goes into what Brendan was just saying, in that I always say that the Gen Z, the buying power is transitioning from the baby boomers to the Gen Zs and the millennials. And the Gen Zs and millennials are more aware of the positive impacts of sustainability. They're more aware of the positive of the impacts on climate change. They're more aware of the impacts of diversity and inclusion, and how diversity and inclusion can be a competitive advantage for an organization, right? So to you, in your opinion, how do you think sustainability comes into risk? Also, we first have to define, how do you define sustainability, and then also, is there a reputational risk if you kind of publish it, or if you are kind of shying away from it? for like the Black Lives Matter, diversity and inclusion, and this LGBT movement. What's your thought? What's your thoughts on that?
I'll kick it off if that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. I think it's really accelerated with the whole subject matter is accelerated because of social media. Social media can amplify and magnify both the good and the bad, and you open up basically your entire message to the entire world. So having an intentional approach to it, I think, is critical. And companies that try to do these things where they're inauthentic, they can get themselves into just as much trouble as or more trouble than not addressing it at all.
Right.
The good example I think would be after with the social unrest this summer, there seemed to be a rush of companies that couldn't put out a Twitter post fast enough saying how they support BLM and some of the other movements, and it became almost just a branding exercise. And companies seem to be inauthentic when they were doing it. So, I'm making this up. So if Tide is slapping on, a BLM sticker on their Twitter post to sell detergent, that comes across to consumers as being inauthentic. They may have the best intentions in the world, but if you're not authentic in your brand, you better do some groundwork and figure this out in advance. Otherwise, you're not doing yourself, and you're really not doing the causes any good. So I would say social media, certainly is the vehicle anymore for communication, but you can't take it lightly. If you look at the number of firms that have tried to do social outreach on social media and have gotten it wrong, then they appear somewhat tone deaf in how they approach their responses to it. So it's it's an area that I think going forward is going to be absolutely critical, and companies will need to address it. And I think particularly, and you mentioned this, Justin, there's very much a demarcation between the new generation of consumers, the millennials and the Gen Z, and how they approach the authenticity of companies, maybe with generations. And Gen Zs and millennials can sort of sniff out pretty quickly those are inauthentic.
They do their research.
Not being authentic. So.
Yeah, I think decades ago, companies that thrived were large, and if you look at like a General Motor, you think of these traditional big corporate America blue chip kind of companies, General Motors, General Electric, all those. They survived they thrived because they were big. Everyone knew them, and they put out products. But I think that the world has changed to where now folks need more than just the product. They need to know that the company takes care of its stakeholders. They need to know that the company is mission driven. So the companies that are thriving now typically start with a mission and then fulfill that mission. Where I think before, and I don't think Henry Ford thought, he's like, I'm just building cars, but you start with say a Lyft, the company Lyft, Uber and Lyft. Lyft was very mission driven in that they started their company with the idea of, we want to see fewer cars on the road, and we want to see fewer parking lots in urban spaces. We see that cars are used 5% of the time, and the rest of the time they sit taking up space somewhere in a city, and we want to fix that problem. And they said, okay, the idea is to share cars. How do we get cars from being used 5% of the time to 95% of the time? Well, that's sharing them. And what's our first step in doing that? So they're very mission driven, and I think that's the stakeholders are looking for that kind of mission driven, whether it's your customers, your investors. They're looking for, is it something I can get behind this company, and can I support that? And that becomes their brand. I'm supporting this mission. I feel good about what I'm doing. We're also seeing it from the investor side. where if you don't have robust sustainability reporting, you don't have robust sustainability processes or attention to it, investors are going to put their capital elsewhere, which means that your shareholders aren't going to grow their value because capital is not coming to you, it's coming to someone else. And so I think a failure to address those changing wants from your stakeholders, whether it's investors, customers, will present a risk to you from a reputation, from a sales, from a stock price. Failure to look at sustainability and have to embrace that. We were one of the first in the lodging real estate sector to put our sustainability program in Earthview. And Earthview, we partnered with Cornell and we built a program to address how should we look at our business and how can we take more of just, how can we take care of more than just the investor? So, BlackRock, which is an investment firm, came out and said that investor primacy, that the investor comes first, is a dead concept, that you need to take a more holistic approach to doing your business, and they're going to look for companies that do that. And we see that in order for us to attract a workforce, they want to work for a company that is addressing climate issues, social issues, and have good governance, that they're a fair and reputable company. So I think failure to embrace those things for many reasons is going to present risks with your human resources, risks with your investors, risks with your customers, and you can't be successful without those stakeholders.
Excellent. Brenda?
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to add. I agree with what both Robert and Michael said. I have a 24-year-old daughter, and so I can attest she makes her purchasing decisions based upon the impact it has on the earth and the I'll say social perspective mission of the company. There are companies that she will not go and purchase from, even though she likes their product, because of their view or opposition. One I'm thinking of is, their opposition to LGBTQ community. So she just, nope, not, I'm not going there. She'll buy a new, outfit and she goes, Mom, this one was made from water bottles, or, something came and she goes, oh, it's an all female owned company, or it's a black owned company. So she goes for the companies that are making an impact. And I don't think she's alone in that decision. And I think it's great. I think we talked about it with 30 years ago, a company could make a big blunder and it would kind of stay isolated. Maybe it was known in where the company was or in their community. But now with social media, it is out there. It has legs immediately. And so the risk always was there, but the probability is much higher, I'd say now.
All right. Excellent. Yeah. So so everyone, we still have a great turnout in terms of the chat, in terms of the attendees. So as we close out the,
did we lose a couple folks?
Yeah, we lost two.
I had a little glitch in my
we dropped. Yeah, you dropped for a little bit. I thought I said something.
Brenda, are you seeing the other?
What?
Oh, I think.
Oh, you can't see us?
I can now. I'm sorry. I apologize. I must be on my end. Okay.
Yeah, we lost you for a second. I thought I said something.
Must have been my internet. So I apologize.
All right.
So to add on to you in terms of consumer preferences, just an anecdote. My 13-year-old son, I was shopping for some basic hardware and I was going to go to Home Depot and he told me I had to go to Lowe's, even though it was a mile further and had less selection. But that, to the point of it hitting our young consumers, I think my son took issue with something Home Depot did.
But that and that's what I try to. That's why I try to explain to at these professional conferences. But I think that and my thing is the people who attend those sessions, they get it. It's the people who are against these sustainable practices, the people who do not really believe in climate change and things like that. Those are the people that we need to educate, that we need to convert. And I think that and this is for all the attendees on this call, in that it comes down to education, and it comes down to showing these big organizations how it can make a positive impact on your bottom line. That's how you have to sell it. I mean, let's just be real. Let's be real.
I think, though, I think it was Michael that said that, it's not just about the shareholder anymore, or the investor, and it can't just be about the bottom line.
Right. It can't.
Only about the bottom line, I can everybody's going to make the wrong decision, right? It's a matter of, are you really going to be, are you willing to drive that extra mile to go to Lowe's? Are you willing to wait extra time to go to a different store, or to buy it for a different product to get delivered? Or are you going to take that quick one, that's delivered overnight, but from Amazon? I'm a Lowe's supporter. I went to Lowe's one day. A young guy came out. He met me at the door. He was willing to push my cart. He had his little Lowe's vest on, and he told me the story about how he first went to Home Depot, and he was handicapped, but they would not hire him. They did not hire people like him, that he was told. And Lowe's hired him immediately. And so I'm sure there's more to the story, but I think companies have to understand every person in their employ is a face to that business, and that's right. It ties back to culture, right? And I worry from a risk perspective whether the pandemic is affecting each company's culture, because we're not, you're not together. And so while people still see each other over a Zoom call or a different type of call, I do think some of the culture is understood and embraced by being together and learning from people, seeing how people act in meetings, this, that, and the other thing. And you kind of lose some of that over Zoom. So I just wonder if that's a new risk area.
There's a lot out, in my opinion, there's a lot of risk areas. There's a lot of risk areas, and there's a lot of opportunities that have arose out of this whole thing. I think that Michael did allude to that, where the opportunities come from, you have to have some level of risk. You have to have some level of risk, right? Because that's where the opportunities are going to come from. So I think that there are going to be a number of different risks that emerge out of this. So we are getting close to time. I just want to go around, and then so I'm going to start with Michael. Do you have any parting words, any suggestions, any words of wisdom for the attendees?
No words of wisdom from me, but I will just reiterate, risk is something that is integrated throughout a company. It's part of the fabric of company, and companies cannot exist and make profit or do anything without risk. And that means, how do I manage risk, maximize risk, so that I can maximize the results I want to get. And I think if you're thinking about risk, just think holistically about it and how it impacts every bit of any business decision.
Excellent. Bob?
Yeah, my parting comments would be, as you look out at your future, whether it's personal or business, don't lock yourself into decisions that are going to kind of affect you for 3 to 5 years. You think out 5 years from now, it's going to look much different than today, and you cannot anticipate what it's going to look like.
Excellent point.
So think about a lot of different scenarios. Maybe you have 10 different things, or 12, or of how things may play out, and don't just say, okay, this is what's going to happen over the next 35 years, because I can almost guarantee that it will not work out in that one scenario that you have planned out for you.
That's an excellent point. Brenda?
Yeah, I'll just say, as you go out for your interviews, interview the company, not just like you interview the company, not just see it as the company is interviewing you. Know what your table stakes are, know what you're looking for, and be able to tell your story. You not have a long, a career or projects to talk to, but you still have a story, and be willing to share that and tell what the value is that you can bring, and it'll help you decide whether it's the right company for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's an excellent point. In that, I always say that everyone has a story. So and I try to get that story out of my students, because you have it, and I think that it is very valuable to that organization, because the one thing that I always explain to undergrads and grad students, whenever I was interviewing people for ERP projects and for consulting engagements. If you get to my level of interview, I have 5 people, and all 5 of those people on paper can work for the company. Right? Now it's getting that you have the technical skills. Now it's coming down to fit. Do you fit in our culture, and does our organization fit with you and what you're looking for? Right? So don't I would say be yourself. And because if you're trying to give that interviewee, what you think they want to hear, that could backfire for you. That could backfire, because you could be, yes, you might get the job, yes, you might get that great salary, but about 3 months into it, you might hate that job. So I mean, I think that, and don't take a job, and don't take your job just for the salary. I will say that I'm one of those people that made that mistake early in my career. Right. I tell my students, I was chasing the money. I'll be completely honest. And but I think that it kind of falls into place whenever you have experience within the industry, and you figure out how your values can align with your career, and then it's not work. It's not work. It's passion. Right. I'm getting paid for my hobby. That's how you have to look at it, and so I think that that's what you have to think about as you go into the industry. All right, so I think we ran about 6 minutes over. Apologies for that, but that was a great discussion.
Great, good job. Thank you, Justin, for moderating. Thank you all for attending.
Yeah, thank you. Be well.
Thank you. Bye.